My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are absolutely delighted to have with us tonight our friends, Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. Take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Charlene. It's always wonderful to be with you. I've been a neuropsychologist for 40 years. A couple of nights ago, I was talking a little bit about neuropsychological assessment with Ned's staff. And I told this story, one of my favorite kid stories is kind of funny. And Ned says, my favorite story is about that kid from Milwaukee. And so the kid, it's almost 40 years ago, I tested this kid who had just moved to Washington, D.C. from Milwaukee. And I asked him this question on this test of reasoning ability. I said, how are beer and wine alike? And the kid says, well, I think in my church, they're both used in communion, which I still think is funny. Now, as a neuropsychologist, the last 40 years, I've lectured about dozens and dozens and dozens of topics. And the last 6 years, I've lectured about one. Ned and I do a lot of stuff together. When I do it myself, it's about this sense of control, because it's such a powerful idea. And we got to a sense of control in part because the importance of self-control is this, that everything that's stressful involves a low sense of control. So it's a key to mental health. And Ned's going to talk more about that in a little bit. And the other thing, every place we looked when we were writing The Self-Driven Child to understand how do kids develop that healthy internal motivation, all the arrows point in the direction of a sense of control or autonomy. And it's an important thing, and we're going to focus on the mental health piece tonight. And I'll just say a couple of words about what you know that we have this kind of this crisis in mental health. And last year, the Surgeon General said the mental health status of adolescents is the defining public health crisis of our lifetime. And just more recently, research has come out that shows that 18 to 25-year-olds have even more mental health problems than adolescents do. And it turns out that kids and fairly affluent parents, with fairly affluent parents who go to high achieving schools are at particularly high risk for anxiety, depression, substance use disorders, and even certain kinds of delinquent behaviors. And the hypothesized causes for why this is an at-risk population are, number one, kids in these kind of families, and they don't feel as close to their parents on average. Many do, but on average. And the second is they experience what they call excessive pressure to excel. And the excessive pressure to excel in one survey by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation was the fourth leading cause of unwellness in adolescents after poverty, trauma, and discrimination. So it's a big, we focus a lot, and certainly a lot of the kids that we're working with, and Ned and I work with, are in this high-risk population of affluent kids in high-achieving schools. And one of the things we're focusing on now is that for many kids, school is the greatest source of suffering in their life. And we're working on trying to get schools to understand the importance of giving kids more autonomy and promoting their sense of control. One of our friends, Stuart Slavin, went into these 3 suburban high schools in Ohio Achieving District. And he found out that this really, not surprisingly, these very high rates of anxiety and depression. And they asked the kids, tell us what's most stressful, what makes you most stressed. And the top 12 stressors were all related to school achievement, getting into college, that kind of stuff. It wasn't social media. It was all school related. And a study that was done out of Yale in 2020, this is before the pandemic, of high school students found that 75% of the feelings they reported, 75% were negative. And the majority of kids said that they felt tired, bored, and stressed most of the time they're in school. And so we're trying to focus some of our work, or a lot of our work actually, on what can we do in schools. Now, let me tell you what a sense of control is and what it's not, because it's an interesting idea, powerful idea. And the way we think about it is 2 dimensions: subjective, the subjective sense of autonomy or agency. And the other part of the subjective piece is that confidence that I can handle stressful situations. That's partly what you get. I have a sense of control, meaning, I've handled stressful situations, but I'm not going to freak out. I have confidence that I can handle it. So it's a subjective sense of autonomy and confidence in the ability to handle stressful situations. And secondly, it's the brain state that supports that sense of control, where your prefrontal cortex, the most recently evolved part of your brain, that can think about past and future, can plan, organize, and can talk yourself down when you start to get stressed, regulates the rest of the brain, including the amygdala, that very primitive part of your brain that senses and reacts to threat. And we know that the best neurological marker for resilience, emotional resilience, is how strong the connections are between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And thinking about a sense of control in these two dimensions gives us two ways to promote a sense of control. One is by promoting autonomy, a sense of agency. And the second is by helping kids stay in a brain state that's optimal, meaning not chronically tired, not chronically stressed. And we feel that this is such a big, so that's what it is. What it isn't is feeling chronically stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, or feeling helpless, feeling passive, feeling what's the point, like that, feeling stuck. No matter what I do. And so that's what it's not. And Ned, well, I'll say one last thing. It's a powerful idea in part because the young people in most of the in the developed world are struggling. They're struggling emotionally. And our book has been a big bestseller in China, where they're having a lot of difficulty with emotional kind of problems and motivational problems in young people. We've done programs in India and Pakistan. We've been consulting with people in Ukraine, recently Palestine, because they understand that life feels out of control. How do we give kids a stronger sense of control over their own lives? Yeah. So Ned, you want to talk a little bit about kind of how we got here? And
yeah, I'd love to. And one quick point you made about the pressure that a lot of kids feel like they're under. I know that I know that Jennifer Wallace and with her wonderful book Never Enough was one of the guests that Charlene and Bev and Parent Venture had early in the year, and we love that work. That builds on that Robert Wood Johnson Foundation study. The point that I want to emphasize is this: that in the communities that I think a lot of you are from, the communities that we're from here in DC, it so often feels like what people are often chasing is wealth, money, and in school, grades. Often with the belief that if you have enough wealth, it protects you against stress of life. And if you have A's, it protects you against the stress of school. And it's not true. And it's just really, really important, and in part because the pressure that children especially put themselves or feel themselves under all the time to achieve at a higher enough level is the same stress that undoes their mental health. The thing that protects children and all of us, our brains, against the effects of stress is a brain state that allows us to tolerate in a healthy way the effects of stress. And so this is really where we got at this. I mean, Bill and I came at this idea of a sense of control for two things. One, the importance of the centrality of a sense of control for a healthy motivational system of intrinsic motivation. We're not going to talk about that today. Talk about another talk. And that the sense of control is absolutely at the core of mental health, in that almost every mental health disorder that you can think of anxiety, of depression, of eating disorders, of schizophrenia, of substance use disorders, all of these things have at their core that they're stress-related disorders, meaning not that these are people who are under stress, because we all experience stress. And that's part of, stress can be exciting, and stress isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's a brain that is not able to tolerate in a healthy, sustainable way the stress that person, that system is undergoing. And because we know that the most important work of children is not getting into college of their dreams, and I can say this because I'm a college because I'm a test prep geek, that the most important outcome of childhood and adolescence is developing the brain that children will carry into adulthood. Because you got one go at this. I mean, we can patch things up, but we really want to make sure that that's the central work of all of us as parents and all of us as educators, is how do we foster healthy brains. Now, this sense of control, one of the researchers whose work we love, a woman named Sonia Lupian, who says you can summarize what's stressful to people with the acronym of nuts, what makes us nuts or crazy. So N is novelty, new situations, hey, not just the coronavirus, that was the novel coronavirus. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Unpredictability. This is what makes traffic so hard. If you grew up with a parent with an explosive temper, you never knew where they're going to be fine or they're going to be throwing things around the house. Really hard on nervous systems. T is perceived threat. Mostly for children, that's threat to ego. Am I cool enough? Am I smart enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I strong enough? On and on. Do I get into good enough college? All those things that are really threatening to ego, but particularly at the time that adolescents are trying to craft their identity of themselves, and they pay attention, perhaps too much attention, to the opinions of everyone around them. And then S is the low sense of control. And this is the one that matters most, in that a low sense of control is the most stressful thing that any of us can experience. If you're in the middle of trying to listen to what Bill and I are trying to share with you, and you got a text that, oh my gosh, your spouse, your kid is someplace and something's terrible and get her, and your phone went dead or the other person's phone went dead, you couldn't possibly pay attention to anything that we have to share because your brain would just be hijacked by that fear because you had such a low sense of control. Curiously, these things that are hard, novelty, unpredictable, even threats, if you feel a healthy sense of control, this is going to be really intense, but I can handle this, then you don't go to pieces. You go and you work the problem. My twin brother's a paramedic. He deals with gnarly stuff in the world. He deals with situations beautifully because he has a high sense of control. He has the agency in the sense that I can handle this. The second researcher whose work we love is a guy named Steve Mayer, and he's probably most well known for doing work on what's called learned helplessness. And probably the most foundational piece of research that we've looked at, he looked at, they did all this work with rats and dogs and all this kind of thing. And then this foundational paper, it's worth looking up, called Learned Helplessness at 50. And the idea of what do we get right and what do we get wrong? And he said the thing that we got wrong was that these animals, it wasn't that it's not that they learned to be helpless. Rather, it was that they failed to ever learn a sense of control. And this is real, it's a significant difference, that the default setting for all the way down to 2-year-olds is they crave a sense of control, but they have to learn it. They have to wire brains because infants start out helpless. And over time, we want them to become, fully autonomous adults. So let's talk about just one study that shows what happens, what a sense of control looks like at a neurological level. So in this paradigm experiment, they have these rats. And by the way, a lot of research done with rats because they're very smart animals, brains similar to people, but we can do things to rats that ethically we couldn't do to adults or to children or to people generally. So there we are. So they have these 2 rats in a cage and they're both going to get shocked. Light goes off. They know their shock is coming. Very stressful to them. It's not life-threatening, but it's really annoying. One rat has a wheel in the cage that he can spin and it attenuates, it stops the shock. The other rat has a wheel that he can spin and nothing happens. Rat A, when he spins the wheel and he realizes, oh my gosh, this is stopping the shock, he realizes he feels a sense of control. And he gets this massive activation in the prefrontal cortex that Bill mentioned a moment ago, and it dampens down the stress response. This is neurologically what coping looks like. This is intense. There's something I can do. It's going to be okay. And there's something that I can do to make it okay. Fantastic. And the cool thing is this, it generalizes. You can put that rat into another experience with big, scary rats, loud music, bright light, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't freak out or panic. He again goes into coping mode. And so the research suggests that the experience of handling with autonomy, feeling a sense of control when something was challenging or even stressful or intense, seems to inoculate the brain against other stressful experiences carrying forward. Pretty darn important. Here's the really clever, devious twist that they did, and this is where it comes into us as parents. He yoked the 2 rats. They both are getting shocked. Rat A spins the wheel, it stops the shock for him. It also stops now the shock for B. B, I'm sure, is gloriously grateful and happy in all sorts of ways, except that he doesn't have a sense of control at all. Fast forward, rat A, this super resilient, emotionally tough rat, rat B remains a basket case because he's forever a damsel in distress looking to the sky for someone to save him. And so we note this, and as Bill and I will talk about in a moment, our suggestions for you as parents or as teachers, that we don't want to save kids if they can save themselves. We don't want to deprive our children of the opportunity to feel a sense of control, even in difficult situations, because we're missing this opportunity to inoculate the brain. And significantly, the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, the rat A was growing, are the single strongest neurological marker of mental health. Because when you think about it, if you're anxious or depressed, your thinking is out of control. You don't have any sense that what I'm facing is something that I can cope with. Couple things that are important. Again, all anxiety-related disorders are about a low sense of control. With mood disorders, with substance use, with oppositional eating disorders, all of these things, substance use disorders, are maladaptive attempts to feel a greater sense of control. When we think about things that are healthy and helpful, the active ingredient in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the gold standard for treating anxiety, is that cognitive behavioral therapy increases the perceived sense of control that people feel in the very situations that make them stressed. It's also the case that sleep and exercise and meditation and yoga, these are all things that increase our sense of control. Again, that connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. All things we want to pay attention to. Unfortunately, for children, the longer they're in school, the less their sense of control gets lower and lower and lower. Kids in kindergarten typically have more autonomy, more choice, more free time, more downtime, more rest, more naps, more sleep, all of it, than they do in high school. And rare, by the way, is the parent who is hovering over their kindergarten or asking if they've done their homework and trying to check the grades for how they did at Play-Doh. But we do this in high school all the time. And so there's a lot of things that this is important, but there's also a lot of causes for hope that both, as Bill pointed out, in that subjective sense of autonomy and in the brain state that supports healthy brain development, that we can increase the sense of control that children have and downregulate the degree to which kids are struggling with anxiety, depression, and other stress-related disorders.
Yeah. And Ned, I'll just mention that one thing about the studies of rat A and rat B, in adolescence, the rat A had just one experience of being shocked and turning the wheel. It changed the brain in a way that made him hard to stress the rest of his life.
I remember when you and I spoke with Dr. Mayer,
yeah,
and you then said, should we be thinking then about administering shocks to adolescents? And he smiled and leaned back and said, it's an interesting question.
Yeah. Well, there is there's a literature on stress inoculation in the sense that you get kids conditioned when something stressful happens to go into coping mode as opposed to avoiding or freaking out. Right. And I also mentioned that once you start thinking about this, at least for us, once you start thinking about the sense of control, it shows up everywhere. I remember when we work on the self-driven child, an article came out in the Atlantic about a cluster of suicides in the Bay Area. And I was struck by the fact that one of the experts was asked, what's going on with these kids? And she said, they feel existentially impotent. The other expert who was interviewed said, I've been doing therapy with these kids for 25 years. And 15 years ago, they fought back. I'm not going to live like this. I don't care about this. And now they're just resigned to it. And it's really striking. And I also just, one other thing, it's just when you think about this connection between a sense of control and mental health, it seems pretty obvious when you think about it. If you're anxious, you'd like to stop worrying, but you can't. You're thinking it feels out of control. If you're depressed, forget it. If you have some substance use problems, the world is completely chaotic. And so I think that this is why we feel so strongly, and we've seen the last many years, so many kids and so many families being much less stressed and much healthier by focusing on this sense of control. Now, how do we do this? How do we help kids develop this healthy sense of control? And I would say that our main, the things that we emphasize the most is this idea that is parents thinking of themselves more think of ourselves more as consultants to our kids, especially as they get older, than as their boss or their manager or the homework police. Yeah, I was, I had I was I was talking in Houston a few years ago, and I happened to mention probably the most elite school in the Washington, D.C. area. And after the lecture, this woman came up to me and said, we here I work at the Menninger Clinic. I'm a therapist at the Menninger Clinic, this very excellent mental health facility in Houston. Says, we know these kids, and we know Sidwell Friends really well, because so many of the graduates get into the top colleges in the country, but as soon as they get a B, or as soon as they realize that everybody here is as smart as I am, or as soon as they reach out to somebody, they get ghosted, they crumble, and they take a medical leave of absence, and they come here for therapy. And she said, 201, they simply don't have enough experience solving their own problems, making their own decisions, running their own lives. And so some of the principles of this idea of thinking yourself more as a consultant whose goal it is to help your kid over time figure out who he or she wants to be, figure out what kind of life that they want, and how to create the life that they want. We see that's our role, is the most important role as parents. And the first thing is that we offer help and advice. We don't try to force it. So many parents say to me, I've told them a million times, or I keep trying to get them to see. And I'll talk a little bit more about how some of the language we can use to get buy-in for kids, rather than just blathering on or tell them a million times. Dad has this great cartoon. This dad is holding his two sons and saying, "Listen up, boys, and listen up good, because I'm only going to tell you this a million times." And so we want to offer help, offer advice. We want to be clear about who's responsible for what. I went to a school meeting a few years ago, and a kid who I had tested, who was finishing 8th grade in a Catholic school, applying out to Catholic high schools. And he had learning disabilities. I just tested him a couple months before this meeting. He had learning disabilities, ADHD, a language disorder. School was hard for him. And I go to the meeting, and one of the learning specialists says it takes 2 learning specialists and the kid's mom on top of him all the time in order to get him to do anything. And I said, you might want to think about changing that energy, because if you're spending 90 units of energy trying to get him to work, he'll spend 10. And if you ratchet up to 95, he'll spend 5. It's not going to change until you change the energy. And a related point is, don't work harder to help kids solve their problems than they do, which is amazingly powerful. Once we get into our head that I don't want to work harder to help a kid than he works to help himself, because I'm going to weaken him, because he's going to think somehow I'm responsible for him doing better rather than he is. So we don't want to work harder. And when kids have problems, I did this exercise years ago with a parent educator, and we made up these scenarios. You got a 3rd grade girl, and she comes home, and she's the only kid in her friend group who didn't get invited to a birthday party, or a 10th grade boy who flunked a class, or got cut by from the basketball team, girlfriend dumped him, comes home. And the first, we suggested to the parents, ask yourself, whose problem is it? Because the fact that we're mammals, we're wired to protect and to soothe our young. So we're just instinctively want to say, well, do this, or it's not that big a deal, or try this or that. And if we say, remember, whose problem is it? We can take a step back, and we can say, is there a way that I can help? But ideally, we support them in solving the problems themselves for the exactly reason that you mentioned, that. Because it sculpts the brain that when something stressful happens, I go into coping mode, as opposed to trying to avoid or freaking out. And we talk about, in our second book, and what do you say? We talk about the language of a parent consultant. And we think about the two ways. One is, I mentioned, this language of getting buy-in. So, and I use this all the time with my clients, and rather than saying, you need to do this, I say, I wonder what would happen if you tried this, or you want to hear my idea about that? And a lot of times I say, for whatever it's worth, and then I'll run by an idea about them, but I'm trying to make it tentative so they don't feel forced.
You use that on me too, Bill. It's remarkable.
I know.
It's very insidious.
I know. It's a good point. And we also, a really powerful line is simply, is there a way that I could help? And I remember, Charlene, Ned and I gave a lecture that you organized when we were in person a few years ago. And we were talking about this stuff. And a woman sent you an email the next morning and said, after this lecture, I went home and my seventh grade son came to me in tears and he said, I'm the weakest kid in seventh grade. And just normally I would have said, no, that couldn't be true, honey, or but you're good at so many other things, or we're all late bloomers in this family. And so I just didn't. I remembered, whose problem is it? I said, is there a way that I could help? And the kid was crying, said, I don't know. And the mom said, well, let's sleep on it, see what happens in the morning. And the next morning, honest to God, this kid comes to his mother with a written plan of how he's going to get stronger. And so all she had to do was say, and so many parents have told me that just saying, is there a way that I could help? Where we aren't laying stuff on kids, it's just so powerful for healing a relationship, for getting buy-in like that. And the last thing I'll mention is we talk about the language of no force. And I'm often, as a psychologist, I'm often asked to talk kids anything. Well, I've told them a million times, maybe he'll buy it from you. And I tell people, I don't believe in trying to talk kids into things, but I'll talk to them about it. And I consulted with a mother a few years ago of a kid who was 13, and this is an observant Jewish family, and he had refused his bar mitzvah. He said, I'm not going to do it, dug in his heels for a year. And the mother consulted with me. She said, that we're observant. It's really a big deal. And how can I get him to do it? And I said, well, the first thing to tell him is that obviously we couldn't make you do it. We couldn't make you learn the Hebrew part. We couldn't drag you up onto the stage and move your lips. I mean, obviously, so no, you don't have to do it. And I just acknowledging that I couldn't make you do this is it feels scary at first. Once you do it a little bit, it's really empowering because you stop trying to do the impossible, which is to make somebody do something against their will. So she goes home, she says, obviously we couldn't do it. We couldn't make you do it. So no, you don't have to do it. But also I want you to know that it's really important to us. It's really important to your grandparents. It's important to your aunts and uncles and your cousins, to your friends. We want to welcome you to the Jewish community. I hope you'll find a way to do it. And 2 days later, this kid said, okay, I'll do it. And he negotiated. He didn't want to do it in front of the whole synagogue. But they worked it out happily, a way to do it. And what stopped him refusing for a year was simply saying, I can't make you. It's a powerful use of language.
And if I could add one quick thing,
please.
Bill. I mean, one of the things, I mean, first of all, these things end up feeling like Jedi mind tricks when you work. Like I can't believe that this works. But one of the things about this language that's really attentive, for what it's worth, is I came from this idea by you. Because a low sense of control is so stressful and fires up the amygdala, when any of us feel like even advice is being forced on us and the amygdala flares up, then it's like shields are up and we become incredibly defensive, and therefore we lose flexibility in the prefrontal cortex, right? And it's hard for us to shift our positions. It's hard to put things into context. And if you have a kid who is wired that way, I mean, perhaps if they're autistic or ADHD, or certainly if they're mental health issues of anxiety and depression, by definition, these are people who are going to struggle to be flexible in their thinking. So your advice could be perfect advice, but if it's delivered in a way that to the receiver, even if the receiver that feels controlling, then you're not only are your words likely, sadly, to fall on deaf ears, but that wonderful advice that we have to share with our children, they will sort of bat it away. And now it's sort of tainted because then, I've got to go eat crow in addition to taking dad's advice. Yeah. And so often so much of what it is the language and the advice that we all parents have is correct. It's the how that we when we can think about making those changes, we can be so much more effective. And it's painful if you have a kid who's struggling with mental health and all you're trying to do is help and you feel ineffective. My gosh, then you're going to be stressed as well. So the language you shared, Bill, is I mean, I know I've got an ADHD kid and a ADHD son and an autistic daughter, both of whom have 20 IQ points to me. So I'm already going to struggle to win an argument. And these ways that you describe are just so effective.
Yeah. And I'll just make one more point before I turn things back over to you, my friend, and which is that In our second book, we have a chapter on what we can toxic versus healthy expectations. And parental expectations are really powerful predictors of academic achievement in general. But the most effective kind of expectation is not, you need to get those grades up, buddy. We don't accept B's in this family. You need to do better, work harder. It's, I have confidence that you can do well. And because the toxic expectation, which is you must, or I'll disapprove with you, I'll be angry with you, I'll discipline you if you don't, it's coercive, and it communicates unconditional love and approval, which isn't so healthy for development.
Mhm.
So just think about this: that expecting, communicating confidence, and so many of the kids that we see a lot of really smart kids who know they have a lot of potential, and they think that to fulfill their potential, they have to achieve at some extraordinarily high level. And what I tell kids is that you fulfill your potential, you reach your highest potential by creating a life that you're happy with. And so I'll turn it back over to you, my
Yeah,
friend.
and part of that can conveying confidence in kids is confidence in their ability as decision makers, and you know, we feel really strongly, in part because we feel really strongly that one of the most important things that we want to say to kids at the youngest possible age, you're the expert on you. Like, I got ideas about all kinds of stuff, right? But you're the expert on you because only you know what it feels like to whatever, right? And particularly when they're teenagers, to say, I have great confidence in your ability to make good decisions for yourself. Now, chances are not every decision is going to be right because, you know, last time I checked, you're human. But I also have confidence that when you make a decision, that you're going to be able to figure out something to make it good enough, to clean up that mess. And this is really important because the making decisions is a very complicated executive function skill. I mean, a lot is going on in a lot of brain development because, you know, easy decisions are easy. Hard ones, when it's 49-51, you got to go back and forth and back and forth and back, and you got to weigh a whole lot of variables all at once. And it's really good for brain development. We also want to make sure that kids have so much experience doing this before they go off to college, where we're not there to help them and to guide them. We're just not as readily available. Now, parents a lot of times say, I know, but this is just too important. And we respond to, is it going to be less important when they're in college, or choosing a career, or choosing a spouse? And are they going to make mistakes? Of course they're going to make mistakes. They're humans. I mean, you know, when we make mistakes all the time, but in part because we want to be that consultant and we want to be able to use influence on our kids, we're so much more likely to have them be open to other perspectives and other ideas they've not thought about when we go in with, it's your call. What you going to do with this? I got my thoughts on this, but this has to be your call because you have to own this, right? And when we take that approach, we're so much more likely to be effective. It's also the case that with most decisions, you know, we don't always know what's in the kid's best, you know, what's best for a kid's life. We don't always know what the right decision is, because do you measure that like 2 days later, or 2 months later, or 2 years later? I mean, I can reflect on when I took a year off from school. Thank God I took a year off from school twice, right? Because I wouldn't be married to the person I'm married to. I wouldn't have been on the college campus to save my brother's life. I mean, they're just on and on it goes, right? And so we want to do everything we can to have kids make decisions. And part of this is that good decisions, we like to think that good decisions are rooted purely logical. I know better, I have better facts, therefore make a better decision. This is important. Decisions start with feelings. They start with emotions. When you think about what do you want out of your life, what does that start with? You know, a pro-con spreadsheet? No, it starts with, what do you want? And successful lives start with emotion, and then they've got guardrails of logic. The great researcher Antonio Damasio makes the point that for people who have damage to the emotional centers of the brain, they can't make any decisions. They can't figure out what to have for breakfast, much less run their lives. So when we say that they're just being child or they're being emotional, we all make emotional decisions, and we want to honor that. And we want to say, hey, it's your call, so that then our kids can be open to the wisdom that we have to share. And so we go with it unless we think it's absolutely crazy. And if you have to call a power play, be darn sure that it's worth it, because the message that we can be giving to kids may short-term win and a long-term not help us.
I just think it struck me, I think when we were working on maybe the second book, that if a kid feels strongly about something and we say, no, I know better, you're going to do it this way, or we do a power play. And sometimes we have to. I mean, if kids are drug involved, or that they're deeply depressed or suicidal, sometimes we have to do a power play. Yeah, but the idea, I want to be cautious about giving, particularly a teenager, the message that don't trust yourself, don't trust your own intuition about what's right for you. I know better than you do. And I'll just take 30 seconds to tell you that one of the most dramatic illustrations of this idea that we don't always know whether something is good or bad. I got a call from a mother recently who her kid and two of his friends were suspended from high school for 3 days because they brought drugs or alcohol to a school function. The kid in question was home with his dad for those 3 days. His dad had a heart attack. The kid knew CPR, resuscitated his dad, saved his dad's life. The family had to reschedule their vacation in Indonesia, on the beach in Indonesia, the week the major tsunami hit in Indonesia. So this kid realized that him bringing drugs or alcohol to the school function saved his whole family. Now we know a lot about the adolescent brain, and we wish the kids never drank, never did drugs. But I'm just saying, it's an illustration of and she's what his mother said. So these kids have been asking themselves for years, was it a good thing or a bad thing? And one of the other ideas, besides this idea of a consultant where we support decision-making and autonomy, another idea is what we call being a non-anxious presence. And we didn't make this term up, but what it refers to, it's based on the idea that virtually any organization, from a family to a corporation, they work best if the people in charge are not highly anxious and emotionally reactive. And we know that there's something called emotional contagion. In our first book, we emphasize that stress is contagious. I mean, because all this, if you're around somebody who's really stressed, your amygdala picks it up and you get stressed too. But also in our second book, we emphasize that calm is contagious, which is in fact one of the mantras of the Navy SEALs to calm situations down, is that calm is contagious. And so when we're calm, our kids pick it up. And also when you're calm, it's much easier to be empathic, show empathy and understanding, and it's much easier to promote autonomy, to let kids to take on healthy risks if we aren't really highly anxious. And there's really convincing research that if parents lower their own anxiety, that it makes the kids much less likely to develop anxiety disorders. And lastly, that if we're non-anxious, if we work on that, move in that direction of being a non-anxious presence, we're more likely to be able to communicate a courageous attitude about life rather than a fearful one. And so, Ned and I are both big fans of meditation. We've been meditating for many years, and it's not easy to get teenagers to learn to meditate, to want to meditate. And I just tell the parents, you do it. The kids will dramatically benefit from your being calmer, from your being less stressed. You will basically radiate calmness that they will pick up. And certainly, given how highly stressed most kids are in our country now, just having a calm environment at home being a safe base, is one of the best things we can do for them.
There are two great research we love, Tina Van Bryson being one of them, who talks about the model for developing emotional resilience is adversity plus support, which is, hey, life gives adversity, and the support, all the parent as a consultant that Bill just talked about. And there's another researcher who says the model for developing emotional resilience is stress plus rest, meaning stress and then stress recovery. And if you think about, lifting weights, it's really the recovery from the workout where you gain that strength. With education, it's not the being taught of things, it's a reflection on it that matters so much. And so when we think about because the world tends to give enough curveballs to all of us, there's enough stress out in the world. If the way for our children to develop resilience is to have full stress recovery, one of the things that can help enormously is for home to feel like a safe base. And a lot of the kids with whom I work are They'll be upset about this or that other, something didn't go well in school or a test or SAT stuff that I do. And then they'll say, oh my gosh, but don't tell my dad, he'll lose on me. He just freaks out about every little thing. Or, oh my God, my mom will be so mad at me. And I suspect that they have a reason to feel the way that they feel. I think they're probably maybe not completely accurately reading the way their parents, because I think the parents are loving and supportive. But what really matters is, how does the kid feel? And so we want children for them to feel safe, to be their worst at home. I mean, a lot of kids hold things together during the school day with friends and teachers and everything else. And then they come home and it's just, and they're done, they're cooked, their self-control is fried, and they really save their worst for their parents. And when children do that, believe it or not, it's actually a vote of confidence in you as a parent, that I trust you to hold me when I'm at my worst, right? And that's a big thing. And if kids feel like they have to be perfect at home, where do they get that stress recovery? Kind of an important thing. And so particularly, and obviously, you know, many of you are probably joining us because your kids are struggling right now with their mental health, right? If everything were perfect, you'd probably be watching a ball game. I get it. And I say this in ways I want to be very, very respectful. It's really hard as a parent to have a kid who's anxious, to have a kid who's depressed, to have a kid who's struggling. And one thing for me is, and for both of us, is that when we think about the fear that we have about our children, almost never is it about right now. It's about the idea they're struggling right now. They've lost their friends, they failed a class, and we worry that they'll get stuck there. And so a couple kind of cognitive reframings that may help you is, one, try to take the long view, to have the sense that this sucks right now, but it's gonna work out okay somehow. We don't know how yet. It's gonna work out okay. Because the more that you as a loving parent can be non-anxious and have confidence, this is a disaster, but it's okay. You're doing the best you can for now. And it's going to work out. It makes it so much easier for your child because it brings down their stress response and turns up that cognitive flexibility, that emotional flexibility. It allows them to think about things differently. It improves their motivation. It decreases their avoidance. All these things that they need to recover to sort of rebuild their life. The other two things I'd say really quickly is that it's hard, but try to put the highest possible premium on just enjoying your child, even when it's a effing mess. I mean, you can ignore the grades that are terrible and screaming up and the room's a disaster, whatever. Your child is still lovable, not because of anything that they have done or in spite of anything that they're doing or not doing, but just because they're a child and they deserve our love. And it's hard to overstate the power of that. I have a kid who's gone through quite an adventure. And when she was full school refusal, look, I'm a guy who helps kids get into college. That was all that I could focus on. And it's hard because we feel like if we could fix that thing that they're sucking at so badly right now, then they'd feel better. And children don't catch up in order to heal up. They heal up and then they catch up. And partly for you as parents, I'm sure you're getting emails from the school. They're late on this, they blah, blah, blah. Holy smokes. Put all of your effort into enjoying your child. And the last thing I'll say is, Bill mentioned meditation. Anything that is a practice for you that lowers your stress is good. Being well rested, taking time with your friends, making sure you get plenty of exercise. I'll share really quickly. My family's had a interesting last 3 or 4 years, quite an adventure, including that our son developed a brain tumor right after the first year of college. That was a lot. It was a lot. And our daughter things were hard. It was all a lot. And of course, there's this COVID thing. You might have heard about that. It was kind of in the news for a while. And my wife and I, we were about 3 weeks into this adventure. And we were catching our breath and we went out for dinner. And she looked at me and she said, I've had 3 people ask me, how are you so calm about all of this? And she smiled. My wife is a lovely person. Her family are terrific, but what's the term, Bill? Technical, neurotic. They're not anxious people. That's not how they're wired. So that's not who my wife grew up with. But she said, honestly, I think it's the meditation. And so if you feel that there's more stress coming into a nervous system or your family system, you want to be very thoughtful about what pulls stress out of that family system, because that will make everything go better. And so, as Bill said, we can help our children be less anxious when we do the things that make ourselves be less anxious. And then we're basically a stress sponge, which goes a long way to helping our kids.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm just thinking this long view that I talked recently to this kid I tested a couple times. Most recently, when he was 17, and he was in a therapeutic boarding school all 4 years of high school, and he's now just finished his PhD. He's starting his own practice as a neuropsychologist in Bellevue, Washington. And nobody who knew him at the age of 11, 12, when he was really started to get really kind of a lot of problems from 11 on, nobody would have predicted that he would be as incredibly together as he is. And I think about your story, which you talk a lot about, Ned, we often mention when we lecture. Ned was in a psychiatric hospital for 3 months in seventh grade, and he's one of the most incredible people I've ever met. And so it's kind of part, and we like to think about accepting kids where they are, seeing with their hard time, this is part of their path, as opposed to things are dreadful or wrong. And I've said recently that I wish I could impart in my brain, the circuits in my brain that have met, that remember hundreds and hundreds of, if not 1,000 kids who are a disaster at some point of their development, who are incredible as adults. I've seen it so many times that, okay, this is just part of their path. So I'd be happy to take some questions. Did you want to talk about happiness?
Let's talk about happiness.
Oh, yeah,
happiness for 1 minute. So yeah,
okay.
And I think Dr. Robert Lustig is in the audience with us. So
no kidding.
Yeah. So Lustig, you jump in about happiness. Well, I'll jump really quickly, and then you talk about happiness. So when Bill and I were writing our second book during the middle of the summer, I was thinking, is there a difference between happiness and pleasure? And I didn't know. And I thought, well, it seems to me there is. And I looked this up, and Robert Lustig, wonderful research on this, and an endocrinologist. And one of the things I learned from his research is that there are different neurotransmitters. Pleasure is rooted in dopamine, so the anticipation of reward. So you get, so that, it's, cookies or getting an award or beating a video game or whatever. But happiness is rooted in serotonin. And it's a different neurotransmitter. And it's just the subjective sense that, you ever have that experience when you're just like, and you got a dopey smile on your face and you're like, Ned, what are you so happy about? Like, and so the question he has in there about ultra processed food. So he talks about recipes, and oh my gosh, Bill, I'm gonna fail the quiz in the 4 hours. Anyway, so the short answer is yes, food makes a big difference in terms of people's wiring. But do you want to talk about happiness for a moment, Bill?
Oh yeah, I'll just mention that I gave a lecture years ago in a very, very high achieving public school, and just to a class, an English honors English class or AP English class, and the teacher came up to me afterwards and said, "These kids all think it's either Yale or McDonald's." And we mentioned, we were out with Bev and Charlene a few years ago, and we mentioned this to a principal in Palo Alto. She said, "Here the kids say it's Yale or jail." And this idea is delusional. I asked these student leaders in Houston a few years ago, what does it take to be happy as an adult? And this guy said, one kid said, well, I think I speak for all of us, that if we get into a good enough college, everything's set. And the point is that kids don't have any idea of what really makes people happy. And so we're in our second book, we talk about ways of talking with kids about the science of happiness, what really makes people happy. Now, do you want to just...
Yeah, and so basically, it's PERMA. It's an acronym PERMA. And so P is positive emotion. Some of this is the way you're wired, but some of this would be, sleep and food and meditation and gratitude practices. E is engagement, or the flow experience of things that are you're deeply involved in. They're super fun, right? Of pastimes. And R is relationships. So, in all the various, so the person at the coffee shop you see every week, you out with your grandmother, your best friend, your spouse, your children, all of the relationships in our lives. M is meaning. So the ways that we feel, whether it's your religiosity or it's your environmental stewardship, all the things that make you feel like that you matter and you're part of something that's more than just you. And then A is achievement or accomplishment. And we get pleasure from, we get pleasure and happiness from achievement. The challenge is that it's just one part of the equation. It's 1/5 of it, right? And so the problem is in societies like where I think where a lot of you are and where we are, people have this idea that accomplishment alone will, because they anticipate, I think how good I'll feel when I get this grade, when I get into college, when I get, and the problem is it's really serotonin, it's really dopamine. And dopamine can actually become addictive. And so, I was thinking, so in one with Dr. Lustig over there talking about processed food, and two, that it's Pi Day, it's just important to remind that accomplishment, achievement is only 1/5 of the pie. So,
What kind of pie is that, buddy?
Blueberry, really good. So, yeah.
You take questions?
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, there was a lot of people on tonight and they all agree with you pretty much, I would say. That was a wonderful discussion. I mean, Bill and Ned, we've known you a long time. We've known you, both of these books, and parents, I just want you to know, Bev and I have been doing this for more decades than we want to count. And this is one of the best parenting books that I have ever read. And we don't say that lightly. Plus, I got my name in one of them here. But they're wonderful books, partly because they're easy to understand. What they're saying makes sense. And every chapter kind of has a rebuttal, the things that your kids will say. Well, I don't really want to sleep. Well, I don't really want to stop playing video games. What do I do? So they walk you through a lot of the scenarios that you will encounter. But we have a couple great questions. I'm going to get to them. But first, I just want to ask you, this is my question, I admit it. Why is it so hard for parents to give up control and let their kids gain more?
We just started thinking about it. We really, this came to us, this understanding of what it is, after a couple of years of lecturing about the self-driven child. If it's true that I think it is true, that a low sense of control is the most stressful thing to experience. The more control you see to your kids, the more you have to sit on your hands and zip your lip. And there's nothing more important. There's nothing more stressful than that. So I think that's it. That we have. It's not a sense of control. Isn't being in control. It's really the illusion of control. And so that maybe I can't control everything. Maybe I can't handle everything. But I have that feeling that I can, and that protects me. And I think as parents, we have the illusion that I can make my kids do things, I can control things. We really can't, because if they flip flop on the floor, you can't really make them do anything. But we have the illusion of control. Is protective in some ways, and if we start giving that up, then we have to find another way to have a healthy sense of control. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and as Robert Lustig and you all are saying in the chat, it's fear. We're afraid something's bad is going to happen, and it's our job to protect kids, right? And yet, you're here to say, we all love it when our kids are really little, and we enjoy their sense of mastery as they learn to crawl and sit and walk. And then somewhere along the line, we sort of forget that and start to impose more controls on. Why do you think that is?
Do you want to go into that? Or?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of things. For what it's worth, Jonathan Haidt has a beautiful piece today that just came out in the Atlantic today about basically the cell phone world that we all live in. And, when we think about cell phone technology, we tend to sit there and, well, children today and kids and teenagers, their phone and blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that I think is really worth pointing out is in so many ways, how we have been hoodwinked by technologists to think that the way to keep our kids safe is to surveil them in every possible way. I will say with my children, I not once, not ever, never, not once, ever looked at their grades, went on a portal. I get an email from the school, their grades are up. They're not my grades. I'm not going to look at them. If my daughter wanted to share with them, I was happy to talk with her about them if she wanted support, but they weren't my grades. And so we have this idea that if we know where our children are down to the meter and their GPA down to the 100th of a point, that we're somehow going to make things better. But it's a little bit like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, that when you try to figure out the location of a photon of light, you change its trajectory. And when we've done this and we check and we check and we check and we check, and we think that this is going to make us feel better, but we feel better in the moment. But this is really what an addiction looks like. And in the short term, we feel better. And over time, it makes us as parents and us as educators more fearful. And it takes a lot of courage to trust our children. And frankly, to trust that there are other adults who actually have our children's best interests at heart. I will never forget, I had a family I worked with. I was 24, working with this very complicated mom, herself a therapist. And she said, you will not understand until you're a parent yourself, how powerful it is to have other adults around your children who care about them, look out for them, and have their best interest at heart. And having kids who've gone through brain tumors and things harder than that, which I won't talk about, I can't tell you how endlessly grateful I am, from starting with Bill Stixrud to people at Children's National Medical. And we become more individualistic and hyper vigilant. And we should have greater trust in both children and in other people, including educators, that nobody becomes a high school teacher for the stock options. They do it because they want to support children. And we do a disservice when we micromanage teachers. We think that that's not going to affect, we think that's going to improve things for our students. I feel pretty strongly that that's wrong-headed. And so it's a collective effort for us to be more trusting of our children and of our teachers and of one another, because it doesn't get better on the path that we're on.
And because we've lectured about this stuff for about 7 years now, that we've just had hundreds and hundreds of people say that I started to trust my kid, I started to get control, and my relationship got better, my kid did better. It just works, because the reality is you can't really make a kid, you can't really control them. And the reality is if they don't develop that sense of control, then they're going to be chronically anxious or depressed, because it's that sense of control. It really is the key to mental health. And there's a lot of ways we can help them do it, but getting past our own fear and just and not being so influenced by their parents, because certainly if my kid is in first grade and my neighbor's kid has an hour of homework and my kid doesn't have any, well, I could worry with my kid that kid's going to get ahead of my kid. And a lot of our fear is like that.
Mhm.
And yet it's delusional. It's not rational. There's no evidence that homework contributes to learning in elementary school, and the neighbor kid doesn't really need to do it in order to learn, and it's not going to get ahead of your kid. But it takes courage, and it takes courage to really live your values. And I think that many parents who say, what I want most of all for my kids is to be happy. And yet the value, that gets lost in the fear-based push for higher and higher achievement.
So true. When I met you two, you were kind of famous for the phrase, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. Remember that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Oh, I wrote that line in 1986. I mean, and yeah, and I saw so many families where the parents would say, it's like World War III, trying to get the kid. And the kicker for me was I'd ask underachievers. I said, if you don't turn in an assignment, who's most upset? And invariably they'd say my mom. Then I'd say, who's next most upset? My dad, then my teacher, then my therapist, then my sister. The kid was never on the list. And I realized that but we don't want to act like somehow we're responsible for the kids learning. We say, I'll help you in any way I can. I'll be your consultant. But I couldn't make you do this. I don't want to fight you all the time. And I'll mention, Charlene, that when the book came out, that's the title of the second chapter, The Self-Driven Child, I Love You Too Much to Fight Through About Your Homework. And one of my clients emailed me when the book came out and said, I just told my 8th grade son, I love you too much to fight through about your homework. And first he smiled, and then he hugged me, and they said, is something wrong with you, Mom?
Oh, gentlemen, listen, there are a couple questions here. I know we are at the end of our hour. Ned, should we touch on these, or should we say that this is something we should answer offline?
I'm happy to, I defer to your judgment.
I'll tell you what, let's do one quickly, because I think it's important. Are you able to bear with us for a couple?
Sure.
Could there be any place better than spending time with you and Bev? Come on.
Yeah.
And these wonderful parents. No.
A little later where you are than where we are. Okay.
I got pie to eat, so.
All right. That's true. You got pie. Parent asks, my kid has highly sensitive personality from birth, low stress resilience to start with, already tending towards depression and anxiety. Is there any way to break this cycle?
I'll let Bill go
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, and certainly there are some kids that some things like ADHD and autism are like 80% genetic. There's a very strong genetic vulnerability to autism. For anxiety and depression, it's more like 30 or 35%. So there's some, I mean, I saw a 4-year-old once um, who was walking on the beach in this beautiful summer night and squatted down and said, I don't want to live anymore. And both parents were on medicine for depression. Next time I saw this kid, she was completely irrepressible because she's on medication. And so I do think that what we want to do is we want to do what we can to prevent these circuits in the brain from that being the default being stress, fear, anger, depression. And so certainly, I think that cognitive behavioral therapy can really, if kids use it, it can really help them change the circuitry in the brain by increasing their sense of control. And as Ned said, a few studies in the last few years have basically said the reason that cognitive behavioral therapy helps kids is because it increases their sense of control, that they develop more control over their own thinking, they learn how to break up their physiology better. And by exposing them to stressful things, they develop that confidence. I can handle stuff I didn't think I could handle. And certainly the things we know about are certainly is therapy. For a lot of kids, the medication is an important part of not getting letting those grooves get too deep. That physical exercise, when kids really exercise, that it's as powerful as antidepressants, in elevating mood, decreasing anxiety. And we're huge fans, we said we're huge fans of meditation. But I think that there's a lot of ways that we can help kids turn this around. And certainly but as Ned was saying, by enjoying them, meditate yourself, learn transcendental meditation and let your kid kind of radiate that calmness to your kid. There's a lot of ways we can do this.
And I would add to that, if we remind ourselves that if we go back to rat A and rat B, Mayer's point was that these animals had failed to learn a sense of control. And so if you're incredibly sensitive, if you were born that way, right? You're stressed by everything. But if over time you develop a greater sense of control, you're naturally going to be less stressed. And so I'll go back to my daughter. So, I mean, we didn't understand. She was diagnosed at age 18 and a half with autism. Brilliant, brilliant woman. But, and she had a neuropsych evaluation done when she was in 8th grade, and they didn't pick up on it because she was bright enough and she was masking that nobody knew, right? Nobody knew the cause for this. And I remember talking with her, she was anxious and depressed and all the hard things that go along with that. I won't go into the details. And I remember when she was in maybe 9th grade, meeting with her psychiatrist, and he said, I simply cannot believe how little emotional resilience Katie has. I just can't believe it. My daughter is now in her first year at college and she applied for 5 jobs, got 3 of them, picked the one. Her second semester of college, she said, I know that my tuition only pays for 15 credits, but would you and mom pay for me to take 18 credits? This was a kid who basically avoided school for 6 years. I'm like, who are you? What have you done with my child? I mean, it's stunning. And I wish those of you who have children who are struggling could have met my daughter when she was in 8th grade and meet her now, because it's like she was in a cocoon and she came out metamorphized. And so what we did was everything that we're talking about here, all that we cared about was that she was getting sleep, was moving her body, and that we made home be as fun, as safe for her as it could be, because she has a nervous system where the world didn't feel safe for her. Yeah. And she is, I wish I can't explain to you the change that she has had. And so, and the last thing, of course, is that the prefrontal cortex, Bill, I listened to lecture, he said the most powerful thing that I have ever learned about the human brain is how slow to mature is the prefrontal cortex. Cognitively 25, emotionally 32. And this is why, as we write in our book, you never, 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 never give up on a kid, and never let them give up on themselves, because you just don't know.
Yeah. And I'll quickly, that's beautiful, Ned. And I obviously I agree with everything you said. The thing I'll add is in the first book, we talk about this research on what they call orchid children versus dandelion children.
Mm.
And the idea is that when people first start to understand that mental health problems were related to stress or stress-related problems, they'd look at these kids who are really sensitive and could be easily stressed by their environment. And versus kids who and if you change something in the environment, they're very affected by it. Versus other kids where it didn't seem to matter. You could yell at them, it didn't really bother them so much. And it turns out that these very sensitive kids who could be much more easily stressed, much more affected by their environment, if they were raised with a lot of love and understanding and nurturing, they actually turned out to be more successful than kids who had the kind of a heartier nervous system and that sensitivity is beautiful in many ways, and it makes it hard. But the researchers were stunned to see that these kids who were really struggling early on because they're just so sensitive actually turned out incredibly well.
And I think new brain science helps, don't you think, gentlemen? I remember telling my daughter when she was 16 that her prefrontal cortex was developing. And she looked at me and said, "Oh, thank God. I thought it was going to be like this forever." It was such a relief to know that things were going to change.
I had a parent, and it was very ADHD and doing, with substance use and a whole bunch of things that were hard. And I made the same point about the prefrontal cortex. And the dad looked at me and said, I mean, I get it, but are you sure he has a prefrontal cortex? We'll pop the hood and check it out.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so listen, last quick one here. I don't know if this person is still online, but I think it's a great question. What do you do if you have a child who gets agitated, wants to throw things or hurt themselves? They don't believe in calming strategies like breathing, meditation, or listening to music. Tough situation. What do you suggest?
Well, I think that part of it is there are situations where I think that kind of a behavioral approach where rewarding a kid. We aren't opposed when you reward kids for stuff that we think that they need to do. It interferes with their intrinsic motivation, but there's a way that we can use rewards. And for some kids that you go for a week without melting them, without throwing anything, you get a reward. So I think that at times can be successful. Most kids don't want to be like that. I mean, most kids, when they calm down, they feel ashamed, that they're apologetic, and we want to work with that energy. We want to that. So what I say to kids is that what I tell kids like this is that you have a really sensitive amygdala. That part of your brain that senses and reacts to threat is just so sensitive, and we call it the fight or flight response, and you tend to go into the fight part pretty easily. But it's just because you're so sensitive. You're such a sensitive person. And would you like that to be different? Would you like to be able to have a little bit more kind of time before, be able to kind of think a little bit more about what you're doing and not do that? Almost every kid will say, yeah. And then let's find them a therapist. And certainly there are kids on medication that calms down the stress response that's powerful. And again, what we want to do is I just tested a kid who she's on antidepressant, but she continues to be really depressed, easily agitated, easily frustrated, incredibly anxious. And she's on Lexapro and SSRI, she's on medicine for ADHD. And I said, we got to go back to the psychiatrist and really focus on this, how easily she explodes. And that part, we may need a mood stabilizer or something that'll help her with that explosive part. But medication is some of it. Dr. Lustig, whose work we really admire and talk about in our second book, just exercise exclamation mark.
Yeah.
It's hard to make a kid exercise, and forced exercise is stressful. Doesn't do that for you. So what I would suggest is try the collaborative problem solving that we talk about in our books, where you sit down with a kid when he's in a good mood and say, I know that there's things that really make you stressed. That you have I know you're a really sensitive kid in that way. And I also know that it's hard for me. It makes me really stressed, and I feel kind of helpless. I don't know what to do. I wonder if we can find a way to kind of work this out, to kind of help you with this. And and then say, would you like, what I see a lot is, would you like this to be different? And if kids say yes, would you like somebody to help you with that? And so I suggest that. And then think about the therapy, think about necessary medication, because we don't want kids to suffer unnecessarily. And we don't want those grooves to get too deep. So that's the default, is being chronically reactive.
And if you go back to that idea of it's your call, part of that is, would you be open to trying an experiment? Try this for a week and see if it makes any difference. And if it doesn't make a difference, then it's not worth it. One of the biggest things for me, I am like the world's biggest sleep nut, at least for a test prep geek. And I know how much it makes a difference. And so I was working with this, I think you might appreciate this, Charlene. I was working with this kid. Older sister had gone to Penn. This boy was not her academic equal, and he had ADHD and had language-based learning disabilities, and then he became anxious and he was depressed, and he was basically staying up all night. And so he just couldn't do, he couldn't do well in school because he was getting so little sleep, and there was no way he was going to learn anything, do any homework I gave him, or held on anything. But I knew how much sleep would help him, and I could give a fig about his SAT scores, but it would help him emotionally and heal up. And so I told him the story about another student. I said, if it helped you, if it helped you, I'd be willing to, basically take the money your mom gave me and I'll give it to you. If you'd be willing to try an experiment, for a week, you get a good sleep and see if it makes a difference. I swear to God, your mom will be so less annoying when you get more sleep. And he's like, oh, sure. And so he comes in. So he's like, and so how was it? I said, yeah, pretty good. I said, how'd you? He said, like, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. So I peeled off 5 $20 bills. I have a picture. I can send this to you. He takes the test. He gets, and this is the week of the SAT. He and I take the same SAT. I text him right after, say, hey, how was it? You're going to love this. How was it? Yeah, I think it went really good. His words, not well. I think it went really good. I stayed awake the whole time. That's an awesome place to start, right? He went up 160 points, which was not nearly as much as I wanted for him, but it was something. And most of all, he got the sense that, hey, my brain works better when I'm rested, and my mom is at least a little bit less annoying.
Hey,
so there's that.
That's a win-win. There's that. My partner Paul just held up a sticky note that said, you need to write, your next book needs to be The Child-Driven Parent. You're going to write that down.
That's great. That's great.
We've kept you over long, but
it's delightful.
This has been one of our favorite events. And you can tell from the chat that people are so grateful for the advice and the compassion and everything you bring to this, the knowledge, the wisdom. So final words from each of you, if you would. I'm going to start with you, Ned. Oh, look at all.
I'll say that this is for you as parents. It is hard to be a parent of a kid who's struggling, because we in America have this idea that if a kid is doing well, it's because of what the parent did. And if a kid is struggling, it's because of what the parent did. Mm-hmm. And I remember when things were really going sideways with my kids, and in some ways I'm feeling like, I'm the biggest hypocrite in the world, right? I mean, I've co-written these parenting books and my kids are struggling. And my good friend Bill said, thank God you know what you know. How could you help your kids if you didn't know what you know? And so for those of you who have children who are struggling, and your spouse is giving you a hard time, or your in-laws, or your neighbors, or the school, like, what's right? You got to get this kid. Don't allow the impatience or the judgment of other people to infect the degree to which you want to box out the world and love on your kid like it's a full-time job, because it is, so that they have the chance to feel safe and to heal up. Because nothing matters more than having them be mentally well by the time, in a perfect world, before they leave your household and go out in the world.
Those are beautiful words, Ned Johnson. I remember teaching preschool at Stanford, and we would say, your kids are so great. And they'd look at us and say, really? Like you said, Bill, they could only keep it together during school, but they did that as best they could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, Bill, some final words from you, my friend.
Yeah. A couple Christmases ago, I got a Christmas card from this family, and on the outside of the card it said, "You were right." And I opened the card, and it's these 3 siblings in dressed up with their spouses, and the parents wrote, "They all turned out great." And these were kids who were really a hot mess at one
Technical
point in their
term.
life. Oh man,
Right.
they had ADHD, learning problems, anxiety. One of the kids had to leave at least college at least twice due to depression. And as the brain matured, the prefrontal cortex matured, including the emotional regulation circuits, which don't mature till 32. The kid who had to take a leave from absence twice from college, at least twice. I know about toe times. Is a very successful attorney on Capitol Hill. The others have their own. That one's owns their own business. And this happens to me all the time. I get that. I've done this for 40 years. I get this kind of feedback all the time. And one of my friends was just telling me, saying that he's talking to somebody who's very successful in the DC area, who's recently told his parents, "Thank you for not having a plan for my life." And so the main thing for me is to remember how important this autonomy is. And as Ned was saying earlier, take the long view, because most kids turn out well. And if we keep ourselves together, we can manage our own anxiety the best we can. We can be more loving and empathic. If we can help our kids learn from the experience and grow from their experience. Because so many of the kids who suffered, they can grow from it. That's what we want.
Beautiful words, Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. I hope you get a chance to read the chat. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us and being with us. Look, you're all still here and for saying such kind things. We know that this matters. We see you showing us that it matters. We feel you with us tonight. We know this isn't easy. Some of you are dealing with kids who are really struggling. We feel the love. We want to send it back to you. So again, Ned and Bill, wonderful session. Take care, everybody. Hope to see you again soon. The video will be available shortly. And thank you, Redwood City School District, for sponsoring tonight's very important event. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.